Hey guys, this is a very quick introduction to animation within Clip Studio Paint. My goal here is to help people that are familiar with digital artwork such as Photoshop and Manga Studio to get up with animation very quickly. So underneath File, New, you can select the animation and choose the size, and it will start off with the animation settings. And what you'll see starting off with is the timeline, and you should have layers and tools. Now I've organized tools a little bit differently in Manga Studio, or now called Clip Studio Paint. You can organize your workspace as you'd like, and underneath Window, Workspace, you can register that workspace in any different way that you want to have that workspace arranged. Now when yours starts up, you may see animation cells that might look like this, and you might have another window here. I'm not going to go over those. Those are more advanced, but we're just going to go over the basics of animation. But you should make sure that your timeline shows up underneath Window, and so that timeline needs to be there. So the very basics that we're going to do is just draw frame, new frame, and do a frame-by-frame type of animation. So I'm not going to go into details of animating. I'm going mainly over the tools of Clip Studio Paint. So the first thing that you want to notice is that I can grab this red line, this is my time marker, and I can scrub through, and you'll notice that over here this is the current frame, and whatever that current frame is shows up on the left hand side. Now the Pro version limits you to 24 frames. The EX version allows you to have any number of frames. Now I'm going to go through the very basic way of doing things and then come back in a little bit more detail. But let's just look at the timeline things that we have here. This is the current frame. We'll put it on 10 right here so you can see. This is the first frame, starting frame, and the ending frame. And over here you can edit and create a new timeline. We're not going to go into those. Those are just if you want to have multiple timelines. We can zoom in and out on our timeline, and then use this scroll bar to scroll around. So I'm going to get it there. These are the play buttons, of course, with the go to the start, previous frame, play, next frame, go to the end. And here are the tools that you're going to need the most, and this is creating an animation folder. Now over here we see we have an animation folder that's already been created for us, and we've got another animation folder here. This is showing the same thing but in a different view. This is in the layer view, and this is in the timeline view. And when we're ready to create a new animation cell, we click on this icon. We can specify cell, I'll explain that in a minute, and then you can delete the specified cell. Then here's where your onion skins are. Enable the onion skins. To change the settings on the onion skins, you go to Animation, Specify Cell. Oh, excuse me. Sorry, we want to go to Animation, Show Animation Cells, Onion Skin Settings, and there you can set how many cells go before and after, what their opacity is, the starting and the step opacity, and the colors. So when the tool starts up with a new animation, it will already have a cell created for you, this cell number 1, which is layer 1 here. And now I'm just going to select my pencil, and I'm going to draw a circle over to the left. If I select a new animation cell, it will create a new layer, and also mark it over here so I can draw another thing, and then I can again create a new animation cell and continue this way. Now notice I can't see what's happened before, so if I just turn on onion skins, now I can see, and I've got it set up so that I've got 3 behind and 1 ahead. So if I drag behind, we'll see the 1 ahead, so we can see what's happening in the animation. So of course normally you want to animate with the onion skins on. Again, I would just click New Cell, and we can see where that one was, and just continue that process, and we can animate. So this process that we're having here is just a step animation. So that's the basics. Now I'm going to go ahead and clear this out and then show you about keyframes and in-betweens, and I'll show you about the clearing in a second, but I'm just going to do it right now. One thing that I needed to mention was that this blue line right here is the limit of what will be exported. So if your canvas size is this white area, the blue line shows what will be rendered in the animation. That's set up when you do File, New, and if you'll notice there's this blank space, and it determines the up, bottom, left, and right determine that border, and you can set that however you want. Okay, so now I'm going to do the traditional keyframe type of animation. I'm going to go to frame 1 and draw a circle to the left. I'm then going to go to the middle and click on New Cell, New Animation Cell, and I'm going to draw a circle at the bottom, and then go to the end, click on New Animation Cell, and draw a circle to the right. So now when I'm ready to do my in-betweens, I just go to the in-between position and select New Animation Cell, and I can create a new in-between circle and do the same thing between cell 2 and cell 3. Click New Animation Cell. Notice that as I create these new animation cells, the in-between type of numbering is used, 1A, 2A, and it creates layers associated with that to the right, or rather in your layer panel, wherever that happens to be. And I can change the name of those, so if I just double click on that, call it whatever I want, and it will change it in the timeline as well. So as you're going, you may want to rename these layers based upon their actual order, and to do that we can easily go up into animation, specify cell, standardize in order of timeline, and when I click on that, notice that all the layers are renamed, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and their references here in the timeline are also renamed. To change the timing of the animation, all I have to do is drag the reference, and it will be changed. It will move to wherever you want it to be. So as I click play, we can see what's happening. And for that playback, these blue lines, as I drag them, are really only the area, the playback area, that I'm interested in looking at. So I can just see the playback area. If I want to see the beginning, I can just scroll so I can see that beginning. If I want to see the end, I can change the playback area that I want to look at here. And it just shows the end. Now in an actual animation, you will probably have multiple folders, each folder controlling a different type of animation. So perhaps the body or the head is in one folder, the eyes may be in another, and the mouth may be in another. To illustrate that, I'm going to click on this new animation folder. And notice it will create something that it's called folder 1 here, and it exists in the layer palette as well as folder 1. I'm going to double click on that and just rename it to line or straight, and have a ball go straight across. Now one thing that you should notice immediately is that the animation folder, the first one that we had, has a gray folder line here, but there's nothing in the straight one. And if you look underneath the layers, there is a folder, but there's nothing in it. So in the initial one, it had already created an animation cell for us. We have to create one to start with. So I'm going to go ahead and go to frame 1 and create an animation cell. And so here we have that 1. So now in this case what I'm going to do is just draw, let's say, a line. And notice that I am drawing on layer 1 in the straight folder, not on the other one. So if I hide the animation folder, we see that it's on a separate layer itself. And now if I turn on the animation, notice that the ball is animating, but the line is not. So for the straight, I may go to frame 3 and say new cell, and I'm just going to put a line down there, and again new cell. Notice that it skips a frame just like it did. So if I'm animating on the 2s, for example, and new cell, and so I can do step ahead animation like that, and we can see that animation going on. Alright, so that's the basics of what you need to know about animation. Let's now talk a little bit more carefully about what's actually happening. Notice that over here in the straight folder here, we have a number of different layers, 1 through 6, and we have a representation of those, a reference to them in the timeline. Now watch what happens when I go here and I click on, let's say, 4, and I click on the delete specified cells. Well, 4 disappears, but it still exists within the folder. Let me go ahead and delete 6. Again, its reference is deleted down here, and that's what you need to understand is each of these things here, these numbers here, is not the frame number. It's simply a reference or a name or a label associated with the folder the layer underneath this animation folder. So if you're familiar with Anime Studio or Moho or some other animation products, this is like a switch layer is really what it is. So if you'll notice, I can go to this 3 and I can drag it past 5 to anywhere in the animation. So all that's going to happen is while I'm at frame 1, frame 2, frame 3, notice up here the frame is up top, the reference is on the bottom, and so as I'm at frame 3, it's going to show layer 2. And as I drag it over, layer 2 is going to continue to show. And now notice this. I can go in, I don't have to be, unlike Moho or Anime Studio, I don't have to be on the beginning of that frame. I can be anywhere as long as that frame is showing. I can go and draw on there. And notice that I have altered frame layer 2, what's actually on layer 2, and it is displayed anytime I see that 2 there. And so when I come to frame 9, layer 5 will show up, or cell 5. So it's called a new animation cell, and it's really, the cell is going to be the combination of its reference and the layer, but we've got a layer here, 5, and then that will stay in place for frames through frame 15, and then on layer frame 16, layer 3 will show up, and I can drag that wherever. So if I come down to frame 18, let me now show you the other tool, which is this specify cells. And in there I can now choose any one of the layers that already exist in the folder. So for example, I'm going to choose number 2 and say OK. And so now it brings up that frame 2. Now I'm going to go in and I'm going to modify frame 2 here, or excuse me, layer 2. And as I go back, notice that it also modifies what happens in the beginning, because what's happening is all we are doing is referring to the layer in the folder. So when I go to delete here, I'm actually just deleting the reference. I'm not deleting the layer itself. By the same token, I can go in here into my layer palette and I can delete that layer, layer number 5. And it asks me if I want to, and I say yes. Now notice the reference is still there, but it doesn't exist within this folder. And so it, as you see, the gray part is when something is visible, something's there, and in this part here there's actually nothing showing up because there is no reference 5. So I can just go and delete that reference, and now we see that layer 2 stays in view until frame 15. Now suppose that I actually want the frame, which is on 2, the layer, which is 2, to disappear somewhere around frame 7 and it to stay blank until I get to frame 16. Well, I can go to Animation, Clip, Split. And what will happen is we will have that reference will be duplicated, and now frame 2 is still there, but I'm going to delete the reference here, so now it's blank, and so that portion is blank. Now notice here what we have is this is kind of like a folder here, and what we have is the ability, I can change, this is basically the timing or the exposure is what Toon Boom calls it, and we can go in here and to the at the very top there's a hand, and I can drag that exposure. So the whole exposure is shifted to the right. Now notice to the left and to the right there's a handle, a little square, and when I hover over that I can change the timing of that exposure. And so now I can drag it back if I want, but that's how I can change that exposure. And again, remember, I can just go to the cell reference itself and move that line wherever I want it. The next thing to realize is, again, this is just a painting tool. So if you're familiar with Photoshop or Clip Studio Paint or Manga Studio, it just has layers that we can do how we want. It's just that one of those folders happens to be a switch folder, or an animation folder as it's called here. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this folder, and notice it's deleted from the timeline as well. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to just create some raster layers. Now I'm going to pull it outside of this folder and just draw something on it. Let's just say kind of grass or something on the bottom. And like any other art program, we can close this folder and drag that layer below or above, however we want to do. I can open up this animation folder, and for each of these I could fill these circles if I want so that you've got the proper hiding. And I can create a new raster layer, and let's draw some triangles up top, and again create a new raster layer and a new raster layer that's doing kind of an animation, if you will, like that. Now I'm going to shift click and drag all of these into the animation folder wherever I want them to be. Now notice I don't have any references to them in my animation folder, but we can add references to them at any time that we want just by specifying here layer 1, for example. Let's do layer 4. Layer 3. Layer 2. Now that's a crazy kind of animation. I'm not trying to show anything except for to show that what you're actually doing here. So these layers can be created outside of the folder. They can be dragged. You can drag them in, you can drag them out, and of course if they're not in that animation folder, notice they're not going to show up again. Again, I can turn off the layers here. That turns them off over there. So again, your animation is just a folder that contains these layers that you draw on. Okay, so let me now just show a couple of other things. One is, how do I duplicate a layer or a cell? Unfortunately, there's not a duplicate new animation cell. That would be a really nice thing, but they don't have it. The easy way to do that is to just go to the layer itself, and over here, if you're not familiar with Manga Studio or Clip Studio Paint, up in the upper left of each of the tabs there's a drop-down menu area, and I'm going to duplicate the layer. Now with that duplicate layer, I can go ahead and move it a little bit if I want. So I'm going to click on this Move Layer and just drag it. But first I need to make sure I reference it so I can see what's happening. And now I can drag it to where I want it to be. Also, for things like this, you may want to set your shortcuts. If you go underneath File, Shortcut Settings, you can all the preferences are underneath there, so you can set things up how you like. But let me show you one other cool thing, and that is there's just all kinds of nice things. Remember that it has all of the tools. Here is a clip to the layer below, so that's very interesting here. What we can do is I'm going to create a new animation folder, and I'm going to call that shading. And now what I'm going to do in that one is on the first layer I'm going to create a new animation cell, change the color to a purple type of color, and I'm going to create a rectangle and just drag it over a little bit. Now notice this is much bigger than the red square, but I'm going to now select this folder and say clip at layer below, and notice now both of the rectangles in the animation have a shading that is clipped to the rectangle. So that's a really interesting way that you can do a clipping. You don't have to do a great big rectangle like I had, but that's the way that you can do this. And I can turn that off or on, and we can see how that works. So you could have shading clipped to your objects. The final thing to show is just how you would export the animation. Just go to File, Export Animation, and you can choose Image Sequence, Animated GIF, or Movie. Then you set whatever values you want. It is important to note that at this point in time, Clip Studio Paint does not support audio, so you need to combine that audio in another program such as Moho or Corel Studio, After Effects, or whatever you use. So that's the basics of animation in Clip Studio Paint, and I hope you've enjoyed it.